There's gradual accumulation of free radicals in cells over time, making the changes associated with aging. So over time, you get more and more of these free radicals. Now, one thing that has been proposed, and I'm sure everyone here has heard of this, is, oh, it's okay, just take antioxidants, right? You're going to combat free radicals. The problem is that having free radicals might be beneficial because it's anti-cancerous. It does turn on a gene, P53 it's called, that helps us combat cancer. So in high levels of antioxidants in individuals who do have cancer can increase the size of tumors. So we know that somebody who has lung cancer should not be on high levels of vitamin E. Vitamin E, when they did the studies for anti-aging, they showed that it increases your mortality. And some medications, like the most common one is methotrexate for cancer, is actually a pro-oxidant. It increases oxidation in the body because free radicals damage cancer cells much more than our own cells. So that's something to think about in terms of antioxidant usage. There's another theory of aging, which is your endocrine, your hormones mediate aging. And we do know this is true. We know that your pituitary gland, it's right way up there by your brain, right underneath your brain. The master gland, it does become smaller as we age. It's less sensitive. So when there's a hormone in the system, it's less sensitive to producing other hormones to either complement it or combat it. And it's less productive. Even if it is aware that it has to produce other hormones, like, oh, I have to produce more cortisol, whatever it is, it'll produce less of it. Hormones do control the pace of aging, your biological clock. And if you think of aging as a development, this is very obvious during adolescence. It's your hormones that control development, that control aging. And obviously towards the end of middle age, as we start having changes in our hormones as well. Hormones affect growth, metabolism, temperature, inflammation, and stress. It controls everything. There's a part of the endocrine system called the thymus right above the heart. Do you see it up there above the heart? Just keep that in mind. I'll talk about it in a second when I talk about the immune system, because it plays a key role in the immune system. So I think I'll just need the whole thing. So as we age, there's also an autoimmune / inflammatory theory of aging. And this one's really interesting. So remember that thymus, that gland is the one that produces our T cells. And they're usually all formed by the time we're adolescents. It is more active in adolescence, and it slowly turns into fat tissue. It no longer acts as a gland. By the time we're 70, it's usually in most persons, it's just fatty tissue. And this is important because it produces our T cells. It has slower responses. As we get older, there's slower response of lymphocytes, and has a decreased production of, the immune system has a decreased production of interleukin. And that's important because interleukin is what actually helps. Interleukin actually helps the body give signals to produce killer cells. And we know that people who live longer, who have longevity, centenarians, have more killer cells than individuals with lesser lifespans. And that's really important. And now we know that it's playing a big role also in diseases such as coronavirus, et cetera. Interleukin also tells our body, listen, this is a foreign bacteria or virus or piece of DNA, and this is ours. And as we get older, we have less of an ability to determine what is us and what is foreign. And therefore, we're more prone to autoimmune disease as well. So there's a term known as inflammaging, which is a chronic low-grade inflammation that's associated with aging because we're having immune system deterioration as we age. Inflammation is a common factor in a number of age-related diseases such as Alzheimer's, gout, arthritis, diabetes. Almost all diseases have that in common. So next slide. Next slide. Okay, so we have an increase in autoimmune reactions, so we are more prone to attacking ourselves as we get older. Our antibodies become modified when we age, and our cells don't know the difference between us and other cells that are foreign. We know that other things that have nothing to do with our own immune system, such as medications, viruses, bacteria, foods, such as gluten and grains, have been shown, and mold may form complexes with body proteins that then our body thinks is or knows is foreign and attacks it. So that's what one of the reasons that grains are now implicated in some inflammatory diseases. And there's a lot of research suggesting that we shouldn't consume as high levels of grains as we do, such as wheat and corn, etc. Okay, I do want to make a distinction because I use the word aging right now the way we all usually use it. But if any of you were to really look and look at the research, the empirical literature, you'll see that aging is a total process that begins of conception. That's aging. So between being a baby to adolescence, there's aging is occurring. Senescence is usually what we think of as aging, which is when we reach the ends of development. And that is a stress response to aging. And that's what we're trying to understand. So senescence is a process by which a cell loses its ability to divide, to grow, and function. Why? Because of all those theories that I went through. I know it was a lot, but now it's all coming together. Because the telomeres are becoming shorter, because the DNA might be programmed to do this. As we get older, the cells are not dividing or growing or functioning the same way. We know that senescence is genetically mediated to eliminate unwanted cells from the system. Cells do get older and cells do get broken, and we need to get rid of them. We don't want cells that are not functional in the system. Upon reaching a certain age, the cells are subject to oxidative stress. So again, the free radicals, that's why I went through all that. And then the DNA is damaged, and there's the telomeres get shortened, which results in what we consider aging, end of life, and end of development aging. The reason that we have senescence, though, is not all bad, is because it suppresses tumors. If left unchecked, if we were to age without senescence, we would just be ridden with cancer, and that's the theory. But we also know that senescence, the drawback is that it increases age-related diseases, such as cardiovascular disease and, of course, dementia. So for researchers now, the key is, how do we not proliferate tumors and cancer, but keep us stalled so we don't age, so that we don't reach an end of development stage. So now I'm going to get to the good part, defining super agers. Okay, so I'm a big fan of Ernestine Shepard. I looked her up again because every year she obviously has a birthday. I want to make sure she's 79 now, and she looks phenomenal. So those are goals. She's 79. That's amazing. So she started exercising in her 50s, by the way. So next. The other thing I want to speak about, the term super agers is very attractive. It was actually, I believe, coined in Harvard. But if you look at the empirical literature, before that term was used, and currently it's like also used, is successful agers. And that's what I was taught. The term is successful agers. So a usual ager is a person who just ages without pathology. They get older. You see them visibly get older, but they don't have a lot of diseases. A successful ager has little or no associated age changes, or a super ager is someone, that sign is wrong, greater than 70, not less than 70, someone greater than 70 in chronological age who has cognitive ability and brain volume of someone who's middle age or younger, so it's 30 years younger than themselves. So their biological age is younger than their chronological age. And there's a lot of research showing that if you do a ratio between your chronological age, your current age, and your biological age, and if you're much younger, the ratio is much younger of being biologically younger, you're less likely to have cancer. Whereas if you are older than your chronological age, you really have high risk for cancer. It's a very interesting a correlation. And so this means that aging is not limited by time. It has nothing to do with how long you've been alive, but much more with what your biological processes are. Next slide. Oh, yay, thank you. Yes, I would love control. Thank you. So, all right. So in order to distinguish usual versus successful aging, it's really important because what we consider usual aging, it might be an underestimate of what we can actually accomplish under ideal conditions. So this talk is how do we create what we can control ideal conditions to age in a successful way versus a usual way. So I'm going to mainly focus on diet, education, exercise, nutrition, mental health, and social supports, because all of that moderates aging, all of it. And we can create age-friendly environments for aging, so that we're less likely to have end-stage diseases of aging and acceleration of all these DNA and telomere dysfunctions or processes of aging. So we need to measure what aging is, and we're going to measure it biologically versus chronologically, because it's very easy to say, okay, I was born in 1960, my age is currently so-and-so, versus what is my actual age biologically. And this part I do. This is what I do. As a neuropsychologist, I measure what the person's brain can do. And as you can see, we're pretty in terms of all the brain functions, inductive reasoning, spatial orientation, perceptual speed, numeric ability, your verbal ability, and memory. We stay pretty strong until around almost 70, when we start seeing in most persons a decline. There are people who never show this decline, and so, I'm sorry. Did somebody say something? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. It's okay to interrupt me. And we also see that correlated with this is the volume of your brain gets smaller as we age, but not everyone. So I'm showing you usual aging, not super aging. We see that your biological features, so this is what your medical doctor measures, your HbA1c, which is your sugar measures for the last 3 months, your hormonal levels, of course, cholesterol, your white blood cell counts, your CBC, your blood count. We see that the markers change significantly after age 32. But this can be controlled again with lifestyle. 80% of this can be controlled with lifestyle. Only 20% is genetic. And so this is another way that medical doctors are really measuring your aging, which is your blood pressure, how your kidneys are working, your muscles, your muscle mass, your bone mass. So you usually, especially women, we need bone mass tests to make sure we don't have osteopenia, osteoporosis, your nervous system, your respiratory and your GI system, which is incredibly important. This is where your neurotransmitters are made in your gut. And this is where most of our immune system is located. And this is how we extract most of our nutrients. And for a very long time, that GI system has really been ignored. But that's another way to measure aging. Finally, we can measure aging we can actually measure the length of telomeres, these end caps, how long they are. They sort of look like little red dots. And they can measure how long it is. And the longer your telomeres, the younger you are biologically. And this is called the Hayflick limit. It can predict with scary accuracy how much longer you can expect to live. How many carbon copies you have? You'd have to take a test, a blood test. It's a DNA test, basically a DNA life expectancy test. Many companies, you would have to look. I don't sponsor anyone, or you would just look it up. DNA expectancy. DNA expectancy test are the terms to use. Oh, you're welcome. So another thing that's very interesting, and it's extremely complicated. This is very hard to understand unless you're a geneticist. But there's something called methylation all over our body. And methylation is simply a methylation group, a methyl group will be added to other molecules in order to transfer them around. This is how we get chemical reactions in our body. And as we age, there's a lot of methyl groups on the DNA. And we know that it can measure plus or minus 3.6 years, the chronological age of humans can be predicted. So in years, how much longer you can live as well. This one is extremely accurate. And this is called the Horvath clock. And the people, so this was Horvath and Raj, and most of the people doing this research are up in Harvard. They're still not even sure exactly what methylation is measuring, but they know it's quite accurate in predicting your age. That's how, I mean, the PhDs and geneticists who have come up with these tests. So that's how complex it is. So okay, so I gave you all the news of what could potentially happen as we age usually, and now we're going to consider what we can control to become a super ager. So, and we know this is possible because we've done a lot of research on the blue zones. I was actually in a lab that did blue zone research. Blue zones are areas, geographical areas in the world where individuals live to be greater than 100 years. I'm sorry? Oh, and it's 80%, lifespan is 80% of your lifestyle and 20% of your genetics. And this is from Dr. David Sinclair, who's pretty popular now because he gives all his talks on anti-aging and the chemicals he uses, etc. And so this is to give you hope that most of these super agers, what they're doing is really not based on your DNA. There's nothing really that interesting about their DNA. There is something interesting about their immune system, but as compared to their lifestyle is pretty unique compared to what our usual lifestyle is. And so just to give a big overview, and then I'll go into the details, individuals in the blue zone tend to be regularly active. They tend to exercise. They eat less than average. They're in a plant-heavy diet. They actively participate in their community. They're socially engaged, and they have a plan or a purpose for life. So mentally, they're very healthy as well. So when we exercise, this is the one thing that we see them do is we see them be physically active. Of course, our heart rate increases, which gives a hormone response. And remember the pituitary gland that I pointed to that's underneath the brain. The pituitary gland will release human growth hormone to increase production of bone, muscle, and connective tissue. And so now you see some of these anti-aging clinics kind of trying to deal in these human growth hormones, but you can produce it yourself. All you have to do is actually exercise. The pituitary gland will also regulate your thyroid, which regulates your heart, your blood pressure, your temperature regulation, alertness, and reaction. And this is a gland that oftentimes is impaired as we get older. You see a lot of people having to take thyroid supplements. The adrenal glands regulates inflammation and autoimmune response and controls hunger. And all of this is controlled or mediated or regulated when we exercise. So all these things I spoke about previously that can go wrong, we can actually correct it by exercising. Exercise does something very unique. It increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's like having Miracle-Gro in your brain. It increases the amount of brain cells you have. So we can increase brain cells by exercising. And there's other ways. Oh, and it's also shown to be preventative to all neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. There's other ways to increase BDNF, and I'll talk about it, but it's fasting, calorie restriction, having a low sugar diet, a low saturated fat diet, having sunlight, some vitamin D, not too much, curcumin, omega-3, green tea, or an extract from it called EGCG, resveratrol, which is found in red wine, and social activity. All those things can increase your BDNF levels. So as you exercise, you increase the blood flow to the brain. You bring oxygen, glucose, nutrients to the brain cells. Your cells do grow, which supports connections between them. And very importantly, we wash away metabolic waste, such as beta amyloid protein. This is which is one of the things that we know is likely causing Alzheimer's disease. You exercise, you get rid of plaques and tangles. We're constantly making plaques and tangles, and exercise is one of the ways to get rid of it. And so only 3 hours a week of brisk walking has been shown to halt, to stop, even reverse the brain atrophy in aging. So remember I said this is usual aging. Your brain usually will shrink, not if you exercise. Exercise increases volume of gray matter. So that's actual neurons, and white matters, which is the connection between neurons, because you actually make new ones. Exercise will prevent primary neurological diseases as well. Obviously, it mitigates, it really reduces your risk for vascular disease. It'll lower your cholesterol, your blood pressure, will increase your blood flow, increase your blood vessels. You revascularize, so you're less likely to have a stroke. Individuals with moderate exercise during their midlife are less likely to develop impairment in later life. After 1 year, just 1 year of exercising, older women who lift 2 times per week showed changes in both functional MRIs and cognitive testing. So their brain actually started working better and their cognition improved. And these are older women. So older in the literature means anybody over 65. Just takes 1 year of exercise to potentially increase your cognitive abilities. Exercise in the aging population. When we get older, regular exercise is recommended throughout the life of anyone with a brain. Helps maintain and improve mobility and strength, because we know that falling is the number one cause of death when we get older. Physical exercise aids in rigidity relief, muscle strength and flexibility. We all know that we get stiffer, we're not as flexible, and it helps with that. And if you're not as flexible, you're more prone to injury, of course. And I've already talked about maintaining cognition. It lowers your risk of dementia, and I think that's a good thing. When we don't exercise, so what happens when we don't exercise? You increase osteoporosis. So you decrease your metabolism, you increase your weight gain, and you lose muscle. You don't lose your fat. So if you're going to lose weight, try to lose the fat. And later I'm going to talk about weight, because weight is very counterintuitive when it comes to aging. There's simple ways. You don't have to. A lot of people tell me, I don't like exercising. And honestly, I think most humans are not meant to be in a weight room on a treadmill. Most individuals, I think, do better just being active. I've just noticed that there are some people who are athletes and they love it. They love getting up in the morning and going to the gym. But most individuals really prefer lifestyle exercises. So using stairs instead of elevator, walking after your last meal. This is extremely important. If you just remember to walk after every meal, even if it's 10 minutes, 15, 30 is preferred, you really help insulin. And when you help your body metabolize sugar and your body use insulin correctly, you decrease the amount of plaques in your brain. And that's really important, because that's one of the leading causes of Alzheimer's disease, is insulin resistance and sugar metabolism. Of course, gardening, trying to use a basket instead of a cart when you go to Publix. After 1 hour sitting, which I do a lot of sitting, and it's one of the most unhealthiest things you can do. Sitting is worse for you than smoking. Studies have shown it's that bad. For every, I think for every 2 hours of sitting you undo about 20 minutes of exercise. So you shouldn't. And so someone like me who has to sit and talk to someone for long periods of time needs more exercise to combat the sitting. So try to walk for 5 minutes for every hour of sitting you do. Clean your house, get a hobby, walk your dog. Dogs are awesome because they make you walk them. Go to a museum and do stretches every day. Do stretches every day. Now, this is interesting. So according to health.gov, so research done, what's being recommended right now is 150 minutes a week of exercise. And 2 of those days of the week should be weight-bearing exercise. So about, 50 minutes, about 50 minutes, 4 or 5 times a week should be close enough. I guess that's 200 minutes, but that's what's advised. Studies show that anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes is ideal. And after 45 minutes, there's not an incremental benefit, but if you exercise too much, it's actually bad for you. So that's the good news. Don't exercise too much, is bad for you. Okay, yes. I have good slides. I have good news slides. That's not the only good news. Now, weight is very counterintuitive, right? Because we all think, hey, we got to be skinny to live longer, right? No. So apparently people who are overweight in their lifetime are more likely to have longevity, not obese, overweight. So what is being considered now is changing the BMI, body mass index, to a smart body mass index. So normal is under 25 BMI, but people who live longer have BMIs usually 26, 27, and 28. Those are the numbers that usually the literature shows. So they're slightly overweight. The other good news. Finally. So it's when you're younger, it's better to have a normal weight. But when you're in your 70s, it's okay to have 5 pounds extra. I mean, I'm not talking 20, 30, like something, but 5 pounds, it's okay. And it's actually going to probably be protective. So it's very counterintuitive. And studies show this over and over again. This is especially true for women, that being overweight was actually women who are overweight sometime during their lifetime, not obese, but just overweight, are more likely to live longer. And that's probably mediated by our hormones. However, obesity, which is a BMI over 30, is linked to Alzheimer's disease. And cognition is poor in people who are obese, and obesity leads to brain shrinkage. So we don't want obesity, we want people to be overweight when they're older, which actually I think is normal weight. They're thinking that it's going to be a normal weight for when you get older. It's normal to weigh a little more. So sleep. So I talked about exercising and moving a lot and being active. I'm going to talk about resting because people do not sleep enough usually. So I just want to give you a crash course on what happens when we're asleep, because I think people confuse sleeping with sedation. So I see a lot of my patients who just take sleeping pills and think they're sleeping, or take Tylenol PM or Advil PM, which is diphenhydramine, Benadryl, to sleep. And you're really not sleeping correctly, and it's actually very damaging for the brain. So sleeping is the act where you're in stage 1. We're all hopefully in stage 1 right now, which is awake, I hope. And from stage 1, you go to stage 2, and then 3. Stage 1, 2, 3, and then 4. 4 is longer in the beginning of the night. You see that? 4 is longer, and then 3, 2, 1, and just a little REM sleep up here, not as much. And then you go down again. You never go back to 1. You should never go back to 1, except people who wake up a lot in the middle of the night. They don't ever, they come all the way back up here. So, and then you go back down. 4's longer, which is good. And then REM becomes like moderate. And then you don't quite get enough 4 over here now. Then you start just getting lots of REM sleep. And this is where all the restoration happens for your brain. This is where the magic happens. However, people are waking up around here after 3 or 4 hours, or even here, and they have to go back, and they have to go back, and they never get enough REM sleep. And that's what's happening. And we need stage 4. So individuals who do sleep deprivation work are masochists. What they do is they wait for you to be in a certain stage of sleep, and then they wake you up. So when they repeatedly wake somebody up in stage 4, they become extremely physically tired. What they do is they let the person sleep, and they're seeing their EEG. Oh, stage 4, wake up, wake up. And these people are extremely physically tired. If you deprive them of REM sleep, they're more anxious, depressed, and irritable because your brain is not properly getting the rest it needs, it's not processing correctly. Sleep deprivation may lead to an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So it can look like ADHD, and kids all the time, if they're not sleeping correctly, if mom and dad is not putting them to bed at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, I will not diagnose ADHD. I said, you know what, let's have a month where they're going to bed and getting 10, 11 hours of sleep because kids need that much hour. And guess what, ADHD symptoms usually dissipate. It can be misdiagnosed as a psychiatric condition. And a lot of people can actually, when I say this, they understand. So a lot of us, if we went to college or we worked late hours, we've had nights where we didn't sleep. We had to study overnight, or we had to prepare projects overnight. And the next day we're a little manicky. We're like really wired. Imagine a person who does this for many, many days, they become hypomanic, and it looks like bipolar disorder. They start having pressured speech, disorganized thoughts, all from sleep deprivation, because that's another study they do. They don't let people, they just deprive people of sleep to see what happens. People who sleep well live longer and are less likely to be obese. Not overweight, obese. So this is interesting because I can tell you most of my patients in their 90s, they're great. Most of them say, I'm a great sleeper. I'm like, so I think there's something to that. How much do you need? 7 to 9 hours is what the Center for Disease Control says. We're very different. There are people on the lower end who need 5 to 6 hours, and people on the higher end who need about 9 to 10 hours. And on average, women need about 1 to 2 hours more sleep than men. That's normal too. So most people relate to that as well. They're like, yeah, that's actually normal. We're more complicated. We need to sleep more. Okay. Ooh. We do need to be consistent with our sleep, and just 4 days with less than 7 hours, or your optimal hours of sleep, you start seeing your deficits in your cognition and your mood. You start seeing depression, anxiety, etc. So now we're going to talk about nutrition. Am I doing okay with time? Okay, good. Okay. All right. We're going to talk about nutrition. So what happens when we get older is we don't metabolize nutrients the same way. That's just reality. We actually need better nutrients than when we were in our 40s or 50s and our mid 20s, 30s, obviously. We need a lot better quality. And what I see is people eat healthy their whole lives. They get older, they retire, and then they start eating junk. I'm like, this is the time you need to eat better than ever. And so this is a very complicated slide of everything, all the medical conditions that we know are associated with nutritional issues. So there's some challenges when we get older that make us vulnerable to malnutrition. They make us vulnerable to all these diseases. The first thing is, in some persons, your sense of smell and taste are changed, and our teeth oftentimes are lost. So this happens to us when we get older. Medications can affect our appetite and the absorption of our nutrients. So oftentimes people are on meds and it's interfering with their ability to properly absorb their nutrients that they eat. When we age, our GI tract, it changes as well. There's less hydrochloric acid production. So there's decreased calcium absorption. I'm sorry, not production, absorption. We don't absorb it as much when we eat it. And we know that the best absorption of calcium comes from bones, and most of us don't eat bones, but individuals who eat, and I get a lot of my older patients, they eat tuna with the bone in, not tuna, I'm sorry, sardines with the bone in, they really do a good job of maintaining bone mass and cardiovascular health, because we need calcium for our heart. We also have a decreased absorption of vitamins like B12 and B6 in the intestine. And of course, that can lead to cognitive impairment. And we also we have difficulty converting cholesterol to vitamin D. We're less efficient at it. So we have to make sure we get enough sun. And here in Florida, they estimate about 70% of us are vitamin D deficient, because there's so much sun that we hide from it, or we put a lot of sunscreen on. And I hide from it because it's so hot. And so We know that antioxidants like fruits and vegetables and tea help us with all that free radical information I showed you. And there's a big difference. There's a big difference from the food we eat having these antioxidants. They don't really have the detrimental effects as supplements do. And that's because it's bioavailable. Food is in an envelope of other enzymes, other chemicals, not all of them understood, not all of them discovered. And those chemicals really help those antioxidants work properly and help us with anti-aging and anti-disease processes versus taking a pill. So it's better to eat an orange than take a vitamin C pill. And definitely never take vitamin E foods. I mean, vitamin E pills. Eat the food, do not take the pill because it's associated with increased mortality. So your sweet potatoes, your avocados, and your almonds are examples of vitamin E rich foods. Our brain in particular is very hungry for essential fatty acids. They're essential because we can't make them. We have to eat them. So it's important to have foods such as olive oil that have polyphenols, again, an antioxidant, and it has healthy monounsaturated fats that are good for us. Omega-3 fatty acids, foods such as wild salmon that has a lot of DHA. That's the one that our brain uses the most. We convert almost all the omega-3s. We convert EPA and ALA all into DHA. So it's better to just eat foods that are high in DHA, but it's okay if we eat the other two types of omega-3. Regular fish consumption is associated with a lower risk for cognitive decline and dementia. The problem with fish now is mercury, of course. So it's important to eat fish that are low in mercury, like salmon, flounder, cod, or just ask or look it up. There's constant lists being made of how much mercury is in certain fish. Medium chain triglycerides are also known to be pretty good for us, like such as coconut oil. What we must avoid, and this is one of the things that the literature shows over and over again is associated with Alzheimer's disease, is foods high in the glycemic index. When we eat too much white potatoes, rice, pasta, white bread, sugar. And now, should we avoid grains? That's kind of controversial because in some studies, there's populations who eat certain amounts of grains and they do pretty well with it. But there are theories, and it goes back to the autoimmune theory where I showed you that sometimes grains can cause us to misidentify a protein in the grain and attack it. And we elicit an autoimmune process. And so the theories that most forms of dementia are a consequence of hyperglycemia, high sugar levels, or your sugars are low, but we have insulin resistance. Now your insulin is very high, which causes chronic inflammation, which is often also set off by excessive consumption of grain-based foods. So I'm not saying don't eat them all, just be careful. If you're basically eating rice all day long or bread all day long, it's going to have a cognitive consequence. We know that excess alcohol can cause deficiency in vitamin B1 and cause something called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, or which is basically a type of dementia where the person gets very confused, and then after the acute stage of confusion, they become very forgetful. They completely amnestic. Hepatic encephalopathy as well, because we can damage our liver from excess drinking, and ammonia and manganese can enter the brain, and we can be intoxicated basically, and we can have damage to our brain. So excessive alcohol use can change our personality or mood, anxiety, can increase depression, shorten our attention span, and even cause flapping our hands and motor dysfunction. People who drink in excess and all of a sudden say, wow, it's bad for me, I'm going to stop, unfortunately can have alcohol withdrawal, which is fatal. So individuals who drink a lot should have a medically supervised program to slow down on the drinking, because DTs or seizures that a person gets when they stop drinking altogether. So I'm talking about a lot of alcohol, not 1 or 2 glasses a day or anything like that. However, drinking mildly or moderately, which is less than 5 drinks a week, not all at once. So space them out, 1 every other day. I always get asked the question, so can I drink it? Can I save mine for Saturday? No. may have better mental function than heavy drinkers or people who don't drink at all. There's resveratrol, the red wine, that's a powerful antioxidant, but also the alcohol thins out your blood and releasing acetylcholine, which is a memory chemical. Hydration, this is another thing we often overlook. 20 to 30% of older adults are chronically dehydrated, and this is terrible. When we get older, we're less likely to feel thirsty. So this is something most of my patients say, I never feel thirsty. Yeah, that's a normal consequence of just having birthdays, but you should still drink water. We do tend to store less water because our kidney and our muscle functions change. So we need to constantly be drinking water and staying hydrated. Some of our medications can reduce hydration, and the more common ones are antihistamines, and blood pressure medications can make us dehydrated. Just mild dehydration, which is 2% of your body's weight, being dehydrated, being short of water, can contribute to confusion, fatigue, loss of strength, reduced coordination, and decreased cognitive functioning. Dehydration can lead to kidney damage, muscle damage, heart damage, impaired ability to fight infections, and dementia. Dehydration are worse. The effects of dehydration are worse for women. So we should really be more conscientious of drinking water. Caffeine, other good news. So coffee, modest amounts of coffee is associated with living longer. So that's good news. Finally, right? So metabolites found in coffee and counteract the process of aging and inflammation. And we should be drinking about 200 to 400 milligrams a day. That's 1 or 2 cups of coffee, and preferably in the morning. We know that as we get older, caffeine is harder to metabolize, and people who are drinking coffee after the post-afternoon can interfere with sleep, and we know that sleep is important for the aging process. However, caffeine is better coming from coffee and tea, not diet soda, not regular soda. Regular soda increases your chances of having Alzheimer's threefold, and your stroke risk is threefold if you have diet soda. So not soda. I meant coffee or tea. Let's go back. So after I spoke about all the good things you can eat, we also know that fasting is another way to increase longevity. When we fast, we stop using the sugar, we start producing ketones, and we're not completely ketogenic. It's not true. We're still producing glucose. Our body is very good at always producing glucose. And we start repairing our cells and clearing up all the cells that are bad for us. However, water-only fasting can be very dangerous, especially if you're on medications. So what a lot of people opt to do is do these intermittent fastings where they have a period of about 8 hours where they eat, and 16 hours where they fast. And just 16-hour fast, which is basically, go to sleep, skip breakfast, eat lunch. That should be about 16 hours. If you're not taking medicines and your doctor says it's okay. Just that amount will decrease your appetite, will lower your insulin resistance, will improve your insulin sensitivity, and will lower your blood pressure. It will make your body burn fat, not fat. So you'll burn belly fat, improves your gut flora, improves the immune system, and improves sleep, and increases neurogenesis. You get new brain cells, just like exercising, except the exercising, I think, is much more pleasant than not eating. I spoke about getting some sunlight. You should really, ideally, depending on your skin color, the lighter you are, the less sun you should be getting, the better you are at absorbing the sun. You should be getting some sun 5 to 10 minutes a day so you could get your vitamin D, because vitamin D deficiency, very common and linked to dementia. Oh, and vitamin D now is implicated in coronavirus. People with low vitamin D levels and are more likely to have more severe infections. Mental state is also important for super aging. What's really important is to always keep mentally active. And the key to that is to have something that's challenging to your brain, something that's difficult for you. If you're very good at doing crossword puzzles, then you have to get something more difficult, like Sudoku, or play chess, or play a new card game with someone. Maintaining your mood is very important. We know that a lot of individuals who are unfortunate, they have depression and anxiety, they're more prone to dementia than individuals who don't experience that in their lifetime. And so words of illnesses and lengthens lifespan. And I do get asked a lot, well, is depression genetic or is it something environmental? And the answer is it's a little bit of both. We know that thoughts are nothing but chemical messages. And we know that thoughts are what create mood. And we tend to think, oh, we feel sad because of something, but it's actually because of a thought we had. And that's the only point I want to make with this slide. If you think the thoughts that you have are what cause your emotions, and you have control of your thoughts. And that's how people control their emotions. This is just basic cognitive behavioral therapy, psychology 101. What therapists are trying to do is change the way you think of something so that you don't feel a certain way. That makes sense? And so there's a connection too between negative thoughts, and you can control your thoughts, and your depression. Why? Because every time we have a thought, we create chemicals. And we know that being around negative people, even if you're healthy, if you're mentally healthy, it will cause symptoms of depression. So be around positive people, or be a positive person. Individuals with depression tend to ruminate. So they think over and over of negative thoughts, actual bad things that have happened, or what if this other bad thing will happen. So try to focus on the good and practice gratitude. That's one way to counteract that. So we all do this, by the way. We're human. So just writing, really sitting down and writing things that we're grateful for, or seeing the positive in anything, really goes a long way. And people who live longer tend to be this way, or know this trick, because we can all do the negative too. We're human. Depression and anxiety damage the brain by affecting metabolic brain activity over time. Remember, they're chemical pathways. So cognitive behavioral therapy effectively alleviates depression, anxiety, social deficits. And we know that CBT works just as well as antidepressants. The difference is it's hard work, and you have to sit there and you have to do it. Whereas an antidepressant very quickly changes your chemistry. So most people do end up on antidepressants. It is very hard work. So the hard work is to change what we call maladaptive thoughts that are harmful to us. They're not adaptive. Mindfulness is a big one now. So after CBT has evolved, we're now focusing on mindfulness for successful aging. There's a book called The Happiness Trap. The Happiness Trap, and it talks about being mindful, and it's paying attention to thoughts, emotions, your bodily sensations, being the here and now. Oftentimes we're here, but our mind is somewhere else. Our mind is, what do I have to do tomorrow? What happened a year ago? So our mind is not always present, and it's really important to be present as often as possible, and develop awareness of what's going on here and now, how your body's feeling, what's going on in your environment, the sounds, etc., versus being in your head. And this has been shown, this is a spiritual tradition, but it's not necessarily religious. And that's the whole idea of mindfulness has come from those spiritual traditions. So being socially involved, which is such a sad thing to say in the middle of a pandemic, being socially involved is so good for us. And I've seen personally, this is just my clinical opinion, I have no research, that people have been more affected by the social isolation, especially my patients who are not married or don't have, family nearby. They've really have gotten so much worse because of the social isolation. It's really tragic. This is the year I've had the most notices that my patients have expired than any other year. I said 2020. And I do think it's that social isolation, and they didn't die from coronavirus. I think it's just from the stress. So people with greater social interactions are less cognitively impaired and live longer. And when we are socially interact, we have bigger brains. So remember the whole brain volume thing I showed you? This is another way to prevent the usual aging and go towards a super ager way of aging. People who engage in a hobby just for a couple hours a day are more likely to age well than those who don't have one. So anything you like, it doesn't even matter the hobby. It could be carpentry, it could be painting, it could be whatever you enjoy. Civic activity or working part-time or just volunteering helps preserve your brain functioning. A lot of individuals retire and then all of a sudden they see cognitive changes. All of a sudden they have depression. It's because they're not being purposeful and active anymore. Spirituality. So a lot of studies show that all these blue zones, there's area like the Seventh-day Adventists in Southern California, individuals who practice religion are likely to have better mental health and better physical health and cognitive health. There is a positive relationship between practicing religion and being physically healthy. There just is. Okay, so are there any questions? Oh, I made it. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
So you had a little chart there that talked about the VDN, the
Brain-derived neuropsychiatric
VDNF production.
Good. Yeah.
And I was just wondering, there were a lot of things you could do. Exercise was one of the biggest things, and sleep. And I was wondering how that's affected. I was looking at your chart, but it didn't talk anything about the glymph production that washes out our brain.
Right.
And is there something that we can do that would cause a better cleaning of the brain every night?
So yeah, cleaning of the brain comes from the same things I talked about. It comes from hydration. It comes from sleeping. It comes from fasting. It comes from exercising. So all of that. All of it.
And one more question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
throw this-
You're absolutely right. Because we need to clean out the junk.
You were talking about the thymus and that the thymus really just becomes a lump of fat,
Yes.
useless fat. So in the Super Agers, is that still the same case? Has anybody done an autopsy on someone of that age to discover that their thymus?
I don't know. What we do know is that their thymus, for some reason in them, produce more CD4 killer cells, which is very rare to have. What I read is about most of us have 2.8%, 4% at most. Super Agers can have 30 to 40% of these cells in their immune system. It's insane. And so that's the question. Did these cells get produced? This is very difficult to differentiate. Did these cells get produced in adolescence and they maintained them and kept producing them? Or did we have a subset of them and somehow, somewhere in our body, we've created more of them, or we don't know? That's an excellent question.
And I have another question.
That's a very good
question.
Whatever you think.
If nobody else has a question, I'll shoot it out.
Yeah.
So the other question I have is, you were talking about Dr. David Sinclair, and you probably referenced Rhonda Patrick, Dr. Rhonda Patrick. But I was wondering, I noticed on the things that promoted longevity or healthy aging, let's say, that you had a lack of saturated fats or lower saturated fats, but yet Mercola and Gundry and so many of them are promoting a paleo diet,
which is high in saturated fat.
So I just wondered if you could comment.
That's such a good question. It has to do with our genes. So I was playing it safe. A lot of people with saturated fat, nothing happens. So you really have to know your genes. My genes say you eat saturated fat, you're going to have higher weight. It's going to be bad for you. So there's genes that mediate how you metabolize saturated fat. So some individuals, a lot of individuals do not do well with saturated fat. And a lot of the studies on dementia indicate that saturated fat is correlated with dementia. But I know what you mean. There's a lot of research saying, well, if you eat paleo or Gundry, don't eat grains, just eat and get into ketosis, then saturated fat isn't bad for you as long as there's no carbohydrates. I don't know. The individuals who have lived the longest were not in that type of diet. But they were, and this is interesting though, although they were eating plant-based, like Okinawa, for example, they're eating almost 60% of their diet was purple sweet potatoes. So you're like, oh, that's all starch. It has so much resistant starch, the purple sweet potatoes, that the starch, resistant means we can't metabolize it. We have bacteria in our gut. I didn't even go into the microbiome. We have bacteria in our gut that metabolizes the resistant fat and creates short chain fatty acid, which is extremely hard to get in our diet. and they were in a very low state of ketosis. The individuals from Okinawa, they're like, how can people who are eating almost all carbs, right, starches, be in a mild state of ketosis all the time? Not high, it's just mild ketosis. And it's because resistant starch gets metabolized by gut bacteria, intestinal bacteria, that the byproduct is a short chain fatty acid that goes into the person's blood.
So that would,
very fascinating.
That would work even with resistant starch, like when you undercook your pasta. And
I don't know, because I know then that's get complicated. There's type 1, there's type 2, like for like white potatoes, it has to be cold for the starch to be resistant. This, I don't know as much of pasta or what types of wheat, etc. But yes, resistant starch would be a positive thing to eat. But you really, if you're going to go, you really have to research what you're eating and how it gets metabolized. Like sweet potato is always a good idea. You could eat it hot, and it always has resistant starch. White potato has a type of resistant starch where you have to let it cool down so that your body doesn't metabolize it. It gets complicated. And that's why, yeah, is it undercooked or is it sprouted? Is it not? Then we get very complicated. Yeah. I didn't even go into the microbiome at all. Like all the gut and all the bacteria in your gut fascinates. Yeah, it mediates your aging too. We have more bacteria than we have cells in our body, and it mediates almost all our process.
So
I'm sorry.
thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. And I want to put a plug in for the wellness initiatives this year with the hoofers and the swimming. And now we're coming out with a bike challenge. So for the exercise part of this, we've got you covered. So participate, and thank you for coming.